Talk about that. Okay, cool. So recording is live. So thanks everyone for joining again. There's a big crowd coming in again, which is brilliant. And as we just said to Conor, it's great to have him with us. A lot of people probably know Conor. For anyone that doesn't, I'm sure he'll give a brief intro to himself. But Conor's involved with military testing down in Cork as well, and he speaks at a lot of different conferences, a lot of different events, and he's someone that obviously Darren and I know well, and he's a good friend of the group, in fairness, and he's great for sharing information and sharing our posts and our events for everyone as well. And I can see there's a larger abundance of Cork people in the register list, unsurprisingly for sticking together. So Conor, you're really, really welcome. Thanks for coming to speak to us. I'll leave you just give a quick intro yourself, that's okay. And as per ever, any questions you have, you can fire into the Q&A or the chat box during it, and we can get to it at the end. I'm sure we'll have a few minutes for questions at the end as well, if that's okay with Conor. And over to you, pal.
Thanks. Yeah, the presentation should be about 40 minutes, so that should leave plenty of time for questions. Thanks, Darren and Patrick, for asking me to speak here this evening. The Dublin Meetup has been very kind to the Cork Meetup over the last couple of years, and people pre-COVID actually used to travel from Dublin to Cork, including Darren, who's spoken more than once for us, and many other members of the Dublin community have come down. So we do really appreciate it. So one of the positives of lockdown was that it was easier to speak at this meetup than getting the train up like you usually would. So this talk tonight is the modern testing principles, and it's based on the work of Alan Page and Brent Jensen. Patrick gave me an introduction there, so I'll just say I'm head of testing at Popolo, and I'm involved in the Ministry of Testing Cork as well for a number of years. So you may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I often dream of a world where testing can be done more efficiently, where we take a more holistic approach to quality, and sometimes I even dream that software development could be done better from end to end. And when you find a great idea or encounter something along your journey, you want to share it with others. And that's the whole point of meetups like this one, is that when you encounter something positive along your journey, that you want to bring it to meetups, just like the one here this evening. And what I'm going to talk about tonight is the modern testing principles. At a certain point in my career, I was looking for different ideas and approaches. Now, the interesting thing about the modern testing principles community is a lot of people, including myself, were trying out things and then realized that there was a community trying out other things that were very similar. So where did it all begin? Well, it all began when I started listening to the Modern Testing podcast. And the spin-off podcast started afterwards, which was the One of the Three podcast. And Alan Page interviewed me for a two-part interview about 18 months back. And a lot of the material from those two interviews I've used in the slides this evening. What I found was that the hosts of the podcast were quite like-minded in their approach to how they thought about quality, and much of the community were trying out things that I was also trying. Alan and Brent came up with 7 concise and clear principles over a number of episodes. So now they're up to approximately, I think, 130 something episodes. So over tens of hours, they debated and found a way to these 7 clear and concise principles. And really cool thing as well is that it was all supported by a Slack channel. The Slack channel is called One of the Three, just like the spin-off podcast. And it's a term of endearment for the community and listeners, where they joke that they've only got 3 listeners. Now, they probably started with 3 listeners many years ago, but I'm sure they have many more listeners now. And the one thing as well that caught my eye was that we were influenced by similar books. Some classic testing books like Elizabeth Hendrickson's Explore It. Of course, the Agile testing books by Lisa Crispin and Janet Gregory. And then some of the, what nearly become the classic books now, like the Lean Startup and the Phoenix Project. And then in more recent times, they would have discussed books like Accelerate and Leading Quality, and even, I believe, Team Topology's got a mention recently. So I've given a little context to where the interest came for this. But it's really important to start with what is modern testing. Well, the thing about it is it's not very modern and it's not really about testing. It's more embedded in lean principles and quality. They do say, the host, that modern testing is the antidote to traditional testing methods, and I'm going to contrast and compare those tonight. So now that we know what it is like, why do we need it? Technology has increased competition. You can use the likes of AWS now to scale up an app or a business idea really quickly. And this has led to lower switching costs for customers. So it's become a lot more friction-free, which is good for customers, but is more challenging for business. And traditional testing can often be viewed as a cost and a delay, essentially a bottleneck. Now, that's something that can be debated, of course, but it's one view, of course. And ultimately, we're shipping faster, especially to companies who want to react to market demands much more quickly. And some people would say we've gone through 3 phases. Like, we started with Agile, which in many ways helped developers move faster during the first phase of Agile, but everybody else became a bottleneck in ways, that being test, InfoSec, and network operations teams. And what DevOps did when we started to apply that culture is it started to remove some of those bottlenecks, and we started to release software as an engineering department or as a company. And some people would say then we've moved on to a continuous delivery phase now, that once you go through those phases, that when a product team can release themselves using pipelines, where they're using CI/CD, that often they're gone on to another phase of maturity. And when you're at that point, you can push out several times a day, your testing has to move at that same speed. So ultimately, why do we need modern testing? Why you might need it in your role is if you want to accelerate the achievement of shippable quality. So if sustainability is key to you, you want to release to customers as frequently as possible, and you want to keep your quality levels up. That's a lot of what is at the heart of modern testing. So in the modern testing course by Alan Page, he contrasts traditional Agile and modern testing. And essentially, this is my career, and I'm sure it'll resonate with many people on the call this evening. In traditional testing, where I would have spent the first, say, 7 years of my career, I worked in a separate test team. So we were separated from the developers physically. We sat together. Now, of course, we collaborated with developers and product managers, but for all those initial years in test, I was in a separate test team. And often it could be argued with traditional testing, there's a concern with consistency and predictability. And I would have been engaged in that traditional phase of my career when I would work in financial industry and also the telecoms industry. And then what happened when Agile came along is that we became test specialists on feature teams. So say, like I was saying, first 7 years traditional, then year 8 of my career, I would have sat with the developers. And that was an unusual experience to actually be there sitting with the developers, but immediately it felt right to be there talking to them day in, day out around design decisions, working with them on testing. But often what happens when a tester becomes embedded in a team initially is that they'll work primarily on testing tasks needed for feature or product quality. So what they do is, in many cases, become the gatekeeper or essentially try to test all the output of the developers within that team. Now, what often kind of happened then is a maturity phase can occur during that Agile phase. And especially when people take on board the work of Lisa Crispin and Janet Gregory, and they start to focus on team-based testing where the whole team takes responsibility for quality. And often what a tester will do in that instance is they'll start to begin to influence more and maybe do less hands-on testing and spend more time working with others and influencing others. Now, how modern testing contrasts itself with the other phases is that they see testing as not necessarily a role, but more perhaps as an activity. But they do concede that often it is the test specialist who does a lot of the testing. but it doesn't necessarily need to be a role. And that's kind of that focus on everybody taking responsibility for testing. And also as well, we're all aware there's companies out there who don't have traditional test roles any longer in their department. They have spin-off kind of roles around it, but some companies no longer have that role. Another way it contrasts with the other phases is that it's data-driven and customer-obsessed. And another one is that it's passionate about productivity. And if you look at it, the core modern testing is being passionate about productivity, whereas traditional is often concerned with consistency and predictability. And they're on different ends of the spectrum. So what are the modern testing principles? These are the 7 principles, and this is a brief version of them, which is 1, the business first, 2, accelerate the team, 3, always learn and improve, 4, lead a quality culture, 5, the customer is king, 6, data trumps intuition, and 7, everyone can test. So the real body of this presentation tonight is my journey with the modern testing principles. I'm going to explain each principle using material from Alan and Brent, the creators of the modern testing principles. I'm going to give a real world example of a time when I was a senior tester in a team in Poplar over the last number of years. And I'm going to give you a suggestion that you might want to try out yourself or with your team. So principle 1 is business first. So our priority is improving the business. And a lovely quote around this, I think, is a good test mind applied to a future team is a value add, not a cost. So it brings me to the topic of feature toggles. Now, Martin Fowler's definition of feature toggles is feature flags are a powerful technique allowing teams to modify system behavior without changing code. So you can use them in different ways. You can use them as a kill switch. So you release a new feature, you realize there's an issue with it, and then you turn it off for everybody. You can use it for A/B testing to test features against 2 different groups. You can also use it as a part of your rollout strategy, that if you think a feature is particularly risky, that what you can do is roll it out to a small percentage. So if it was very high risk, you could roll out maybe to 5% of customers a day, something like that. If it's less risky, maybe 25% of your customer base a day so that you get it rolled out over a week. So it allows all these different strategies. So in Poplar, we use a platform called Split.io. So in the same way that people call their vacuum cleaner Hoover, we call our feature flags splits. So at a stand-up one day, we were asking the question, how many splits do we have currently? And we realized that we had 16, which is quite a lot. But we also realized that we didn't actually have a status for each of those 16 splits. And when I looked at that and thought about it, I thought there's 16 opportunities. On one hand, there was the real positive side of it. We now had the opportunity maybe to get software into the hands of customers, and in some cases, making sure that all our customers had a feature. And also as well, that there's potentially some revenue there for us that we can get these features out to customers. It could help a sale, or maybe they're willing to pay extra. On the other side of things, feature toggles, splits, are really useful at getting software rolled out in a controlled manner. But once it's rolled out, it can actually start to form technical debt and become part of a cognitive load, whereby you have to start thinking about, well, if I'm going to release feature Y, then I need, two other feature toggles enabled because there's a dependency. So you have to clean these up as quickly as possible. So there's the positive side of it, getting them rolled out as quickly as possible, and then cleaning up any potential technical debt. So when we drilled down into the data, we realized that just shy of 40% of all the splits we had were rolled out to all customers. So that meant they could be cleaned up. Another 40% were with some customers. And then the final roughly 25% were either work in progress or hadn't gone out to any customers. And in one case, we realized that one piece of code that we worked on hadn't been released at all. So it had fallen between the cracks. So it was time to get that released. So we started to focus on this more, and just within a short space of time, when we put some focus on this, we had nearly 70% of those splits rolled out to all customers, which meant we could clean all those up and meant we could just focus on the last few remaining ones, which is the way we wanted to operate. So that's an example of thinking about how you can help the business and thinking about how something that a traditional tester may not do necessarily, but if you look at the wider scope of your role, you could take on something like that. So a suggestion that I would ask is, ask how we can improve the business, where can we increase value, and where can we reduce waste, which is very much in line with lean principles. The second principle is accelerating the team. And the quote is, we accelerate the team and use models like lean thinking and the theory constraints to help identify, prioritize, and mitigate bottlenecks from the system. Now, in one of the teams we were working with, we embraced the book Kanban in Action, and we read a chapter every week, and as we went along, we started to improve. And by using Kanban and some of these lessons we were learning, there's something became evident quite quickly. Because we were all new to the company, and we very much wanted to prove ourselves, what had happened was I had regressed into more of a gatekeeper role, trying to test all the output of developers, like I talked about earlier in the initial stages of Agile testing. All the developers were working on implementing code and doing reviews. Now, we had a number of problems here. We had too much work in progress. There was too much testing being done in the acceptance queue, which wasn't its purpose. It was just to do quick sanity checks. It wasn't where all the testing was supposed to be done. And our big problem was, as you can see, we were getting nothing into done, so our flow was really poor. And other things we found was that some of the tasks we worked on were too large and that they needed to be broken down into smaller tasks so that we could release small increments of code faster. So the key changes we made there was we reduced our work in progress. We made our tasks smaller. We started to operate more as a team. Everybody could take responsibility for testing things in that acceptance/testing queue. And I began to work with the developers much earlier in the process, pairing with them. And we started doing mobbing sessions as well at a later stage. So this kind of shows that by embracing these principles and visualizing your work, you can start to have a really positive impact. So a suggestion around this principle is ask what things speed up or slow down the team. And see how that works for you. The third principle is always learn and improve. And the quote here is, we are a force for continuous improvement, helping the team adapt and optimize in order to succeed rather than providing a safety net to catch failures. Now, on the topic of learning and improving, I think something that may resonate with people is the concept of using retrospectives and post-mortems. So I'm going to talk about retrospectives first. Retrospectives are a super way of getting a team to grow through reflection and learning. And like the starfish model here, you can use a model like that to work together as a team to figure out what you want to stop doing, start doing, etc. Now, one learning that we got around those retrospectives was that we took away three key lessons over time. The first was to make sure everybody had a voice. Pre-COVID, what we did that was put up Post-it notes on the board and made sure that everybody could give their input. The second thing was the fact that it needs to be blameless when you're doing a retrospective, and I'll talk about that for post-mortems as well. But until you remove blame, especially blaming people outside your team, you can't move on. So it's important to manage blame, and then just to focus on what things are under your control and can improve. And the third thing we learned was just to keep it fresh, to have a variety of formats for our retrospectives. So if you go to funretrospectives.com, you can find a bunch of them there. Now, the other thing you can use around learning and improving, and I think that can help at an engineering department level, and even beyond looking at a whole company, is post-mortems. Now, it's not the most positive words, and sometimes in tech we could use more positive terms. Sometimes people call them post-incident reviews. So often you can use them when a production issue has occurred, or you can even use them for near misses. Now, they come from the aviation industry, and companies like Etsy have used them really well. And the great thing about them is that every time you have a near miss or something goes wrong in production, that you can sit down with the various people involved, whether that be from ops, support, some of the developers, whoever it be, get the relevant people together who are involved in investigating that incident and who are involved in the code that led up to it, and sit down together and figure out how you can learn. And the great thing about these two approaches is that the retrospectives can help you learn at a team level, and the post-mortems can help you at a department or even company-wide. So a suggestion around a principle like this is, what key improvement could your team make right now? Who or what or who would it help? And how will you know if it has improved something? The fourth principle is lead a quality culture. We care deeply about the quality culture of our team, and we coach, lead, and nurture the team towards a more mature quality culture. So let's talk about quality then for a moment. Like, one of the most used quality definitions is quality is valued to some person at some time who matters. Now, that's Jerry Weinberg's quote, extended by Michael Bolton. The great thing about this quote is it got people to stop thinking about quality in terms of code correctness and started to think about it in relation to the customer. Like, which customers are paying a lot of money? You know, do we care about them? Their needs change over time. So it started to bring all that about. But the one thing about quality is not one-dimensional. Sometimes when we talk about quality, we talk about quality as if it's one thing. And I really like this model that Dan Ashby used in a talk a number of years ago, that quality consists of usefulness, so that's the value or worth of something, the correctness, so that it meets the requirements or code correctness, and it's good, it's an emotive experience of something, so that's the whole user experience. And it's nice there because it shows that quality has multiple characteristics that you may need to focus on. And then when it comes to quality culture, a nice definition by Alan Page is a shared mindset that delivering high quality to our customers is our top priority, and that all our practice support this effort. And I think that's a really nice definition of a quality culture. Now, Alan Page has created a quality culture transition guide, and the link to it is at the bottom of this slide. And the slides are available on my website if you want them. So it's a framework that teams can use to drive discussion around quality. It's not a capability maturity model. Some people might argue that it is. What really differentiates it from a quality maturity model is the focus is much more on areas for improvement than levels. So as long as it drives discussions around where you can improve your quality, then it's achieving its purpose. It's got 9 capabilities and 4 levels. And let me show you what it might look for, like if you do it with a team. So down here you have from testing breadth all the way to leadership emphasis are your 9 capabilities. And then you have 4 levels across the top: chaos, growing, competent, and optimizing. Now, what I'd recommend to people is, if you're doing a session like this, is to get the team to fill it out individually in advance of everyone meeting, and then use the time together to figure out any doubts they had around any of the questions that were asked in advance, and then to use the time to figure out where are the key areas you could improve and take some actions away then. Now, we did this in Poplar a couple of months ago. So we've a situation where we've 4 testers embedded in product teams. Now we've 5 testers, but at that point in time we had 4, and there was 2 teams that didn't have any testers. So I did the transition guide with them. And to see if there was any patterns across the department, I put all the results together. And what was really interesting for me was that out of the 6 teams who did it, consistently they said the 2 areas they could improve was around customer data analytics and around customer success. Now, in relation to this framework, customer success means how you work with your internal stakeholders, your customer support, your account managers, your salespeople. So it was really interesting to see across the department that they were the 2 areas that everyone thought they could learn from. So a suggestion here is simply, could you try the quality culture transition guide with your team? And it might give you some ideas for some areas you could improve. The fifth principle is the customer is king. Now, when I was thinking about these principles and about presenting it, I always thought the seventh principle was the one that was most controversial. But it seems that there's a little bit of controversy around this principle as well, and I'll touch on that in the next slide. So the statement here is we believe the customer is the only one capable to judge and evaluate the quality of our product. So is this a controversial statement? In a blog by Brent Jensen, he said the customer is the only one that knows whether or not the product is solving their problem, and quality is customer happiness, not leads to it. So in summary, what I think Brent was getting at here, what I would agree with, is the customer is the only one that knows whether or not the product is solving their problem. They're the only ones who can really tell us that they can derive value from our product. And ultimately, an ultimate way of figuring this out is if they're willing to pay for it. You know, if it gets to the point that, yeah, your product solves a problem to the point that we're willing to pay for it, then that's only a real customer can decide that. What it brings up the whole topic is then is about the customer testing the product. And that's not really what this is about. When we release a product, in most cases, it should have characteristics like it should be performant, reliable, secure. So the customer isn't going to go often, you know, your typical end customer is not going to be doing penetration testing or performance testing. You need to take care of all that, you know, and look at the quality characteristics. So that's what you can do internally as a company, whether that be an engineering department or a wider company, is focusing on quality. But what you can't do is that you're not the customer, so you can't say whether it's solving their problem or whether they can derive value. They're the only ones who can decide that. And that's why I don't think it's that controversial, really. But maybe there'll be some questions and debate about that at the end. And what I wanted to talk about this principle is about talking to customers. Now, there's two approaches you can learn about your customer. You can be qualitative, which is things like getting on a call with them. And then there's the quantitative approach, which is looking purely at analytics. Now, it's nice to have both. If you look purely at the analytics, you may not know why your customer is doing a certain thing. You may say, well, they're always using this functionality, so that must be a really successful part of our product because so many people use it. But it might be the case that they're only using it because they've no other way of doing something. And that's why you need the qualitative thing and actually talk to your customers. Now, over the last while, got some exposure around customers, which is really useful. When I joined Poplar, the test lead at that point in time thought it was a really good idea for us to shadow the support agents. So when they were taking calls, we'd spend a couple of hours listening in on the calls and the kind of problems they were having to give us kind of a feel for the real problems our customers can have. Another great thing was that when product management and UX were trying to find beta customers, running mock-ups past them, or even talking to them about their feedback on a beta, we'd often jump on those calls because then we're hearing customer feedback firsthand. But probably one of the most effective ways that I found was that when we were investigating incidents reported by customers, often the support people would gather a lot of the information, but sometimes some of the tickets we get will be quite complex to reproduce. And often rather than spending days trying to figure it out, often if you can get on a call with a customer who's having a problem, we often found that we could reproduce it by working with them, often in say 10 to 15 minutes on a call with them. So that worked very well. So a suggestion here is there a customer your team should be talking to right now? So the next part then is that data analytics part of it. Data trumps intuition. So we use data extensively to deeply understand customer usage and then close the gaps between product hypothesis and business impact. So what I'd say about this is that data can help you answer some of these questions. And these things may help you move faster and prove when you're being successful or not. You can ask yourself, before we update this feature, how many customers are using it? And if the usage is low, can we freeze or remove the feature? Often when we're working on a new feature or updating existing functionality, a huge amount of the effort can be to get it to work with existing features. Before you spend a lot of effort integrating with a feature, or updating it, it can often be good to look at the data to figure out what the usage is like. And often then you can work with the wider business, people like account managers, and work on a communications plan about how to communicate to the customer then that you're potentially going to freeze or remove a feature due to low usage. Another way you can use data is ask the question, when we deliver this feature, what does success look like? And can we create a user journey to represent success? Now, in one team, as we matured, this became nearly the norm in the team to do this. One simple feature we're working on is that the customer would select a component, but often they found it difficult to find the related properties and which ones they could edit. And we changed it so that when they selected the component, it clearly highlighted it and then displayed all properties that are available, and they could see how easy it was then to edit those properties. The problem around this was that often they couldn't figure this out themselves, and that meant that they were ringing our customer support department for help. So we had some data, the average number of support tickets per month, and we had Google Analytics in place as well. So we knew how many customers were actually taking this journey through the product currently. So what we did was create a new journey that represented success, that the customer would click on the component, edit a property, and click the save button. And what we watched over time was that customers started to move towards this new journey. And as they started to move towards the new feature, then the support tickets started to scale off. A suggestion here is, have you already got data that could help you answer some of those questions on the previous slide? The 7 principle is the one that is supposed to be, would often be seen as the most controversial, and may lead to some interesting discussions as well. And the 7 principle is everyone can test. And the principle here is we can expand testing abilities and know-how across the team to understand that this may reduce or eliminate the need for a dedicated testing specialist. So is this controversial? In many ways, I don't think that it is. There's a certain element of it that's context-based. In some situations, it can often be better for a tester to spend their time influencing others and trying to implement principles like these ones to get a bigger impact on quality from the whole team. The wording as well, if you think about it, it's reduce or eliminate. A lot of people jump straight to the eliminate, but that's the one that's in brackets. The initial thing is it may reduce, but sometimes there's a positive that. And the main positive I pull out of it is, if you successfully implement these 7 principles and you start to make these changes in teams, you'll always be in demand. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that test may be in your role, or it may mean that you do a different type of test role, but it doesn't always need to have negative connotations from the way I see it. Another topic around this is that I'm working on abstract for a talk at the moment, and hopefully I'll get to talk about that more at a conference maybe in the next couple of months. But it's really important to look at when we separate the implementation of code and how it's tested. So Elizabeth Hendrickson was talking years ago, going a long time back, about what happens when you separate the implementation of code and then separated testing. And if you read books more recently as well, like Accelerate, it touched on this point. So what you really want to do is not separate the implementation and testing of code. You want it all done as one. What you want is developers testing their own code and then participating at quality at a team level as well. As testers, when we are part of that separation of implementation and testing, we provide a safety net, either through testing the output of developers so that they don't need to do testing, or in the case of writing a large, say, automation suite that provides a safety net for them. It's much better when we work with developers to help them test their own code and to help the whole team focus on quality, and similarly getting the whole team working on automation work. Now, like the whole modern testing principles, a lot of this is context dependent. You may be in an environment that's heavily regulated, so there needs to be independent testing, or it could be, for example, it could cause loss of life, your software, if it isn't tested independently. So there may be a strong case for it. Well, what I often say about things like this, if there isn't any great inherent risk and you want to move faster, then if that's how you want to operate, then it's much better not to separate your activities. So a lot of this is around sharing knowledge with others, including developers. And I think exploratory testing is very good at that. Now, people who aren't aware of it, it's a thoughtful approach which involves simultaneous learning, design, and test execution. That's Ken Kaner's definition. And the best book on the topic is the one I touched on earlier, which is Explored by Elizabeth Hendrickson. And she says tested is checked and explored. Now, I know there can be a lot of debate out there around checking and testing and the like, but I just think this is a nice, simple quote. And I think it's a great book on the topic. So around transferring testing knowledge and skills, Janet Gregory has a term called human-centric testing, which focuses on the human side of testing as opposed to the more technical side of it, where people would focus more perhaps on automation. As testers, we can do a lot around human-centric testing and influencing others by running workshops around quality, around encouraging pairing and mobbing and participating ourselves, using bug bashes, which is a great approach, I find, before you release a feature to production, to try it out, to invite others basically from other teams to come in and test the software with you. And another approach that can work quite well is dog fooding. Now, like Post-Mortems, we probably could come up with a better term than dog fooding, but for things like mobile apps, having your internal staff try out a mobile app is a great feedback mechanism before you push it out to all your customers because of diversity of devices and screen sizes. And I think at the heart of a lot of these things we can do around human-centric testing, I think at the heart of a lot of this is exploratory testing. So a suggestion here is, if your team is a tester, what would happen if they stopped testing? And what happens when they go on holidays? How does the team operate when a tester does go on holidays? What's the difference? So it's time for me to wrap up now. Some potential challenges or concerns that people might be worried about is, I think it's worth emphasizing as well the context-dependent nature of this. It's very much all about sustaining quality at pace. And if that's a problem you need to solve at the moment, I think the modern testing principles will help you. If you're in an organization where there's a culture there where risk outweighs speed, and maybe you're only allowed to release twice a year or something because of that, I think there might be some learnings from this presentation this evening, but maybe not so much so as that fast-paced environment where speed and quality are more evenly weighted. You may find resistance to change because if you embrace these principles and try these things out, you're a change catalyst. So it's often good to get support for your ideas from people within your team, or maybe a manager will help you support some of these ideas with you. You may have concerns around principles 5 and 7, but hopefully I alleviated at least some of those concerns this evening. A lot of times in the past when I've done this presentation, I've done it internally in Popolo, and I've done it at a conference late last year, is that you may get that feedback devs don't want to test, but I really think that they do. I've seen too much evidence to the contrary. It just depends on your approach. Some developers will just be more curious about it and they'll often engage with testers to learn more about it and they really like it. For others, it could be they've gone through a pain point that they've just had a production incident and they're kind of feeling bad about it, and they realize that they want to change and embrace quality more. And that pain point can happen at a company level as well. Sometimes the quality gets so poor that you can't release as frequently as you wish anymore. And that's when some of these kind of ideas coming in can often help a company. Some of the personal learnings I took from this is principles are a guide, not rules. So they're simply guiding principles. They're not rules that you have to stick to rigidly. It's really important to know that testers can be a force multiplier, that their activities don't need to be standalone. when testers start to influence others and work together to influence a whole department, they can have a huge effect. I think it's really important to have shared ownership of quality, and where possible to not be that safety net. And as ever, is always we're pointing out the importance of collaboration and communication around these things. In summary, this evening we covered the modern testing, around the podcast, what it means. We covered the 7 principles, my own journey with those principles, and I gave you some suggestions to try out. I covered some challenges and learnings. And nearly at the end now, in conclusion, I guess, I think a nice quote around all this is that to find balance. There's some people here on this call, I'm guessing, who are traditional testers, and some of this they would like. There's other people who are at the other spectrum who are in a very fast-paced environment, and some of this, these principles would suit them very well. But the core thing is a good test mind applied to a future team is a value add, not a cost, I think is a takeaway that everybody can take, regardless where they are on the spectrum. And my final call to action is, could the modern testing principles help your team accelerate the achievement of shippable quality? Thanks to everyone for attending and participating here this evening. And time for questions, I think.
Cheers, Conor. That was excellent. A lot of information there for everyone to take on board. So any questions you have, guys, fire them into the chat section. I'll just call them out if that's okay, just so they get picked up for the recording. So anything you'd like to add or any comments or questions you have there for Conor following that, please do put them in now, and we can get through a few over the next few minutes. All at once.
I was overloaded everyone today.
No questions. What's going on? Here we go. Here's one there. There's a few. I'm looking at a few of the names. A few you love asking questions. I don't know what's going on. Francis has asked, how much should a tester that is to guide the developers know about the framework the testing is done?
So how much should a tester that is to guide the developers know about the framework the testing is done? So I think what we're just saying there is how much of the detail of the technology that should the tester know about. So basically, should the tester be at the same level of knowledge as a developer? Would probably is how I rephrase that. And I hope that helps your question, Francis. But that's the question I'm going to answer. Let me know if that's not right. So I don't think you always need to know the detail. Like if you're a tester and you decide to pursue that path, which is you're going to become a developer, then you're probably going to get more familiar with the code. But what I always say to people is that you don't need to know anything about the framework or the code when you sit down with a developer to pair with them. And something I've said to people before is you can ask them questions like, okay, what problem were you trying to solve? What solution have you implemented? And so far, what tests have you done? So have you written unit tests? Or have you done any other form of testing? And those questions can spark a lot of discussion. So that can be just a starting point without ever knowing the code. And that's where you're really getting into the coaching territory. And that's the thing around coaching, like where some of this alludes to, is that if you're becoming more of a coach, you don't always need to be the subject matter expert. But what you can get good at is get good at asking questions and listening. But in relation to balancing that, a lot of testers will try to be working on, say, what we call soft skills, so the coaching side of things, and then the more technical side of the game. So there's no harm there in getting more familiar with the frameworks that are being used by the developers. It can be very useful around code reviews. And if you're mobbing as well, if to participate, if you know more about the code, it means you can be a more active participant as well.
Yeah, cool. Just on that, I think Victor just jumped in as well there and said, I think the question was the other way around. How much should the developer know about testing framework? And he said lots. So.
All around. Sorry. Yeah.
I think that's what it's read around. If that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, the other way around.
No. Actually, it was correct. It was as.
Okay, Victor, you're on. You're on, Vic.
No. Yeah, it's just because the idea of like guiding someone, and then if someone asks like, oh, how do I use this library? I'm doing this test, but I can't make it work. Should the tester be the one guiding them and fixing the testing, like if there's a bug on the testing, on the using the React testing library or something like this, if the tester should be the one helping the developer to debug there, yeah, I think I know what I mean.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna just crack with this few more just coming in. Raj has asked, Conor, have you got any suggestions for API security or performance testing tools?
Kind of stuff we use is Postman's a popular one that people often use. Another one is Karate, starting to pick a lot of momentum as well. There are two ones that are quite nice. So, that allows you both, do your exploring to figure out what you're trying to do, and also can help on the automation side. Personally, when I used to do a lot more automation around API testing in the past, I used to use Python. I used to use a library called Python Request. So that's my personal go-to one. Within the team, within the test team that I lead, they like Karate and Postman. And then the other one was around performance tooling. Yeah, I've done performance tooling review about 12 months ago. I was looking at the department, and we came up with a kind of a tried and tested one and a relatively new one. So the tried and tested one we came up with was JMeter. So some people in the department are using that. So we nearly did an A/B test. One team tried out JMeter for their work, and another team tried out Locust, LOCUST, so Locust with a singular. And that's proven quite popular in the department. So now that's being used by a second team, and potentially a third team are going to use that. So that's proven to be quite popular. The next tool I was going to use after that, if Locust hadn't worked out, was K6, because they have a certain level of integration with GitLab. But it turns out at the moment Locust is what they like. That's Python, and the developers didn't mind using Python.
Okay, cool. Good question from Kira's asked, do you tend to have certain types of testing that you would ask your devs to take over on?
I guess it depends on where you are in the levels of maturity. So it may start with, I'm just going to turn on the light there, that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Very shadowy.
I have to turn mine on a second ago.
We're getting closer to grand stretch in the evening time now. So it's good.
I should run at the dog because it's lashing.
Yeah. So where to get about it's where you are in maturity, like so. Both with the people I work with now, and I actually spend a lot of time interviewing as well at the moment. So I interview not actually very much for testers, but I actually spend a lot of time interviewing developers as part of my role. And from talking to people through interviews and actually work and the people I work with, you kind of have to figure out where you are in the level of maturity. Like so, sometimes what you're asking developers to take over is writing unit tests. So you might be in that phase, So once you get them writing, say, unit tests and starting to automate tests, say at a system level and then probably integration. You may start to think about other things you want them to do. A natural progression then that often they'll move into then is you're going to ask them to start taking over the automation. It's becoming really normal now from a lot of developers I talk to is that they'll write their unit tests, they'll do the testing themselves, and then they'll use something like Cypress to write one or two end-to-end tests at UI layer to make sure it all glues together. And I think the next stage of maturity on then after that, what I find is you're getting the developers then to work with testers around performance testing, perhaps even, drilling down into the detail of security testing and things like that. So I think it depends on figuring out where you are in the maturity stage, but it nearly sometimes feels like the unit testing, then getting more involved in the automation so that the automation isn't a separate activity. And then as you go on, then you'll notice often the developers will start to pitch in what would have been termed non-functional in the past, where they're pitching in with helping out with writing performance test scripts and things like that. Where it gets to the point that basically when a pipeline is built, that it's got all that built into it. And it just becomes the norm that developers would actually take responsibility for a scope of work. Now, it always depends on the feature as well. One feature, security, might be more important than performance, but it's all context driven, I guess.
Okay, cool. Thanks for that. I hope that answers that, Kira. Siobhan Fairman's asked, Siobhan says she's a dev manager trying to harvest a quality culture in the team. She's thinking of doing an online workshop with the team. How would you recommend it to be structured, or what content would you build into a session like that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Yeah, it depends where you're going. I guess it's the problems you're trying to solve there. Like, so what you could do is you could try the quality culture transition guide, maybe, if you want it, and that would give you a list of things that you could focus on and areas for improvement. So that could be a good starting point, because it might start to give you some common ground to move on from. But I suppose without knowing it, I guess I'd need to know more, I guess, around the context, what you're specifically trying to solve, like, because harvesting quality culture can mean different things. So maybe the quality culture transition guide could be a starting point. But I would say, the creators of modern testing principles would say this as well. The book Exploratory has got a lot of stuff in there that can help build discussions with developers. And there's a lot of language in Explorer that actually helps form good conversations with developers around testing and quality.
Okay, cool. I hope that helps, Siobhan. Our pal Carol from the States has asked, you explain modern testing to an engineering team. They shrug their shoulders and ask, when will testing be complete? Do you have tips or tricks for easing teams into this paradigm?
To ease them into it, yeah, little by little, I suppose. Like, so the reality of it is, as you can probably see from the stories, like when I went in to work with the first team and I didn't know about modern testing, when I started with that team at the start, we were very siloed, like, you know, even at a team level. And what we were doing was, over time, is increasing the developers' knowledge around testing, increasing the scope of what quality meant. And what you're trying to do is at a team level. And it's interesting then, like, if you're trying out teams with one or two teams, and they become the role models for it, then that can have an effect across the department, in that others will nearly try to start to catch up with those teams. Like, so you don't need to change the whole department, is the way I'd look at it. Is find a team who you know will be open to it and try working with them. Find a second team then that are similar, and then I think the ideas can often spread across the department. That's what I've noticed in our engineering department. Like, there wasn't a culture of team-based testing a couple of years ago. There wasn't a culture of them pitching in with the automation and the performance script as much as they did. But it was a slowly but surely thing. But it wasn't like overnight that we tried to get people to do all these things. It was just small little increments, you know. Maybe at a retrospective saying, could we try this? And, you know, trying something new for 2 weeks, and in a very slowly but surely approach. Like, so I would say start at a small level, you know, both the volume of people and the changes, and then build from there, like, and be patient about it, I guess.
Okay,
it
cool.
will be my own personal experience with it, yeah.
Okay, cool, thanks for that. There's just a couple more I'm going to rattle off, that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Ketkis asks, it's an interesting question, do you think quality can be measured?
Can quality be measured? It's a great question.
Interesting question.
Yeah, and it depends. Like, there's a couple of ways that you can do it. Like, so there's what have been traditional kind of metrics around it would nearly have been things like you know, bugs in production, number of support tickets. But there's been a shift, I think, in the last while, and I think books like Leading Quality has been good around that, is that we often don't think about quality in terms of the end user and how it actually helps our business grow. So like an example that's often given, like for example, around if you have an application and for example, your e-commerce style platform and you're selling goods online, is that like your revenue is being hit, for example, because people are jumping out at a certain stage in the process. So people put items in their cart, but over half the people never check out and get to the payments page, or maybe 40% of people drop off at the payments page. Like a modern view of that is like figuring out like what's going on there for the customer from a quality perspective, and figuring out if we make changes and what we can do if we can get them further through the process, then we can increase revenue. So I think like traditionally we would have looked at bugs and support tickets, and I think now we're moving more towards revenue, and maybe we can measure it that way, like look at the impact that quality initiatives and teams have on revenue.
Okay, cool. Thanks for that. Avril Dockery has asked, hi Conor, I personally love this idea. Have you observed a quality drop where the testers are not involved in a project or doing all the testing using this model, or when the team testing skills are low in the organization?
Yeah, thanks, Avril. You actually set up it very nicely for something I probably should have touched on tonight. Like the creators of this, when you listen to the podcast, like something they say on something I've seen at firsthand is that you don't basically, if you're going to start to reduce the need for testers and it's something you've planned out, you don't pull all the testers out overnight. Like now, I think that's a lesson Microsoft learned to their detriment. So it's a maturity thing. Like, so at the moment, for example, we have 8 development teams and 5 testers. So often I have to decide, where do I put a tester in which team? Like, and often it starts to make sense. If you look at a team, if a tester's been in there for 18 months, and if they've not been a gatekeeper type role and they've been influencing that team, you could see that if they leave that team, the quality culture that's in that team will continue without the need for the tester, because what they've been doing is not being a gatekeeper and being an influencer. Now, what would be much better then for me as someone leading teams then is if a new team is forming and they haven't had that exposure to working with a tester, and they're at a very much a forming stage as a team, I think it's much more valuable to put that tester working with that team then, rather than the established team. But I've never seen a drop in quality, because when we take a tester out of a team, we plan it. But I do see the concern would be that, yeah, if you just pull someone out overnight and not really put a plan in place or think about it, then it could lead to quality issues. But like across our teams, like when we release to production, there's teams that have testers and there's teams that don't, like, and it's not necessarily that we have a production issue and that maybe that we have to hotfix. It doesn't necessarily come from the team without the tester. It can come from any one of those teams.
Okay, cool. Just literally 3 or 4 more questions. I'm going to just finish them off if that's okay, because
yeah, sure.
Nobody asked a question at the start, and then everyone came in together as per normal. Once it was cool to do so.
Yeah.
Christian Fields asked Conor, have you found issues where devs find it hard to write integration tests that are significantly more complex or challenging on the product than the unit tests which they would routinely write? If so, how have you dealt with that?
Yeah, this topic has come up actually, and I know Christian, we've met a couple of times at conferences and the like. So this topic came up actually at one point when we were looking at how we were going to test microservices. And what the point I got to was that at the time I was embedded in 2 teams and sat down with actually the 2 team leads at the time to talk about the levels we were going to test at. So we all agreed testing at the unit level as much as possible was a good thing at unit testing level. That we also agreed that system level tests were good as well. And to flip up one more level, we thought at the UI layer, especially when we're working with new Angular apps, that we only wanted the minimum amount of tests at that level. But a level underneath that is your integration tests. And we got to the point that like integration tests are slow. They're difficult to maintain. They can often be brittle. So we got to the point that we said that we'll only put the minimum amount of integration tests in place because of that. Now we had a pact as well, which kind of offset it. And we got to the point in some of those teams that there was integration tests. We started to realize that, like, we spent a huge amount of time investigating the integration test to keep it working, but it was never finding issues for us. So we got to the point that we looked at the amount of effort we were putting into those integration tests was very high, and the amount of value, our return on investment was very low. So we actually removed the tests. We were able to mock up things like integrations with databases and stuff. We were able to mock them up at a much lower level. So in summary, what we went for was the least amount of integration tests, and somebody would have to put forward a strong argument for having an integration test. Was mainly where we got to with the process.
Okay, cool. Grant. Patrick Cronin has asked, sorry, just jump for a second there. Oh, sorry, stop. Hi, Conor. How do you push for modern testing when there is a traditional view of testing from a few levels up in the company that is being pushed down?
That must be challenging. Like, just why I give a certain level of context, like, in that I did work in financial and I worked in telecoms and stuff. And when I was working in a lot of those, I was in a traditional mode. So I guess in a way, to try out some of these things, I tried out companies that I thought that the culture would suit us better. The one thing that would help you in a culture like that is one of two things. I think that you can, of course, try to influence people, like, but the thing that's probably going to help you most is if the quality starts to nosedive, that can be a great time to push these things forward to the point that the quality is so poor that you can't release. Another thing as well is that if the business decide that you're not reacting quick enough to the market demands, nearly like the Phoenix project, that can be something that can work in your favor as well to begin to try these things. But I must admit, it is challenging, and I wouldn't like to speak to say that I've applied the modern testing principles in a conservative environment. The environment I've been into in the last couple of years that I've been working in was quite progressive, but had somewhat of a traditional view to testing a couple of years ago. And I and others have tried to influence and change that over time. So all I could say is you could try out some of the ideas at a lower level within the teams and test it out. But in all honesty, it'll be a challenge. And I nearly said to people like that, if you're in that kind of environment and you try the modern testing principles, let us know how it works for you, because I think we could all learn from that.
Okay, cool. The penultimate question is from Catherine Hurley. Catherine's asked, hi Conor, we're starting a new project and want to transform to a continuous delivery model with modern testing principles. We're still ending up with a rush on quality at the end of a 2-week sprint and dev not fully helping with the quality. Any tips for transforming? Does this work better with the Kanban approach?
Yeah, I suppose I'm a big fan of Kanban. People, I know there's a couple of people on calls, so I've listened to a couple of my talks, but I have one just dedicated to Kanban. Yeah, there's a number of things around Kanban there that helps. Like, so Kanban, because it helps you visualize your problems, will make you realize a lot of the problems you have. Like, in relation to some of the problems you're having there, you'll start to see the bottlenecks, so like if you're visualizing it, you'll see the bottleneck at the end of the sprint that there's a lot of work there. And if people aren't pitching in with that, then you're going to see it there. You're also going to see it as well in relation to often quality issues coming back from production is going to increase the workload of the team. So they're trying to often work between current feature work and bugs. So I think Kanban can work very nicely to show people, to visualize these problems and the reality of it. But yeah, everybody has to pitch in for these things to be successful. And I suppose through the experience I've been through, I think Kanban played a big part in some of the successes we've achieved. Without doubt, I think, yeah. Okay,
cool. I'm finishing up. I just left this last that popped up there and I saw it. Yeah. And it's probably a good question to ask yourself, Conor, for someone who's so passionate about what he does. But Elaine is after asking, more generic question, what advice would you give to someone who wants to develop their career as a software tester?
develop their career as a software tester. Very good. Yeah, so the one thing I'd say to people is, and a personal learning from myself, is that I was probably 8-9 years into my career before I engaged with the community, before I started to attend meetups and go to conferences. And it's a regret I have, and I'm envious of testers earlier in their careers who are coming to meetups and going to conferences, because I think that's one of the best things you can do career-wise, is engage with the community, because it'll develop you much faster. It'll get you a chance to share experiences you're having currently, to give you ideas for maybe new roles you'd like to do. So I think it's really good to do that. There's a number of books as well that can influence your thoughts and help you along. And I'm sure it was Heather Reed wrote, is it 100 tips for a new tester? So that can be really helpful.
I tweeted that before, yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good one as a starting point. With some of the books in, like I was saying, like Agile Testing Condensed by Lisa Crispin and Janet Gregory, it condenses a lot of the work from the previous book, so it's a nice entry level into an Agile testing book. And then Explore is very good. I always say to people as well, if you're further along in your career, you're in a reflection mode, lessons learned in software testing, I think it's a great one. But in summary, what I'd always say to people time and time again is, if you're not engaged with the community, engage with the community. Use them to help, share problems you're having, to help you give some, get you feedback and some direction, and then kick on from there.
Great stuff. I think that's a good one to leave it on there. So that question, that would be a nice little finish. That's great. Thanks a million, Conor. Obviously, an abundance of questions there. So thanks a million for everyone for their involvement as well, which is great. Really good talk. The recording in this I'll tidy up tonight and tomorrow morning, then we'll put it out tomorrow if that's okay. So any of your friends or colleagues who maybe weren't on tonight, there's about 80 people on the call here, so it's quite a large crowd, which is great to see. But if any of your friends or colleagues or anyone in your teams where you're working that you think would benefit from this, feel free to share with them. Maybe some of that more additional information, Conor, maybe kind of podcasts and books, any recommendation you might have, you might drop across to me, and I can put it in an email tomorrow as well for people and share. Might be a great idea as well, so we can share that there. Next meetup will be at the end of April. Me and Dar have booked already, so we'll put the details of that out probably the start of next week. Probably just after Easter, actually. We'll give people a week or so to crack away. Hopefully towards the end of the year, next year, when we get live events going again, we'd love to have you up, Conor. Maybe come and join us for a live event at some stage up to Dublin. Oh yeah,
it's a while since I've been with you, yeah. So
we'll have to peel you away from Cork when it's safe to for a night or so. But a really good talk. I really enjoyed that. Dar, anything else to add?
That was Conor. Thank you so much. It was fantastic. I'll just echo again what you said about the community and joining the community. I think that was the best thing that I ever did as a tester. It really, 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 really advanced my career. But it also made me some good friends, I got to go to meet you guys in Cork, and, we've got to hang out, and, it's just nice. The community is really, really supportive. It's really good. It's worldwide as well. And there's a lot of there just doesn't seem to be much negativity about the place. It's always supportive.
Something I think I flagged with before as well as good is, I think Conor touched upon it there briefly. He's answering another question from Elena, is when you actually have questions or need help or need support or need advice and stuff in your career as well, there's 1,200 in this group for a start, and I'd find it very surprising if you message any single person in this group and asked them for help and they didn't come back to you with an answer, or at least point you in the direction of someone who could as well. It's a great resource, and obviously there's so many free resources out there. You don't have to always go to a conference that costs a lot of money, or you don't always have to travel and go somewhere that's going to be expensive for yourself as well. There's so many free resources and free online learnings, and literally just messaging people and ask them what else they can do. Ciara's asking any recommendation for the test meetups in Dublin? No. I don't think so.
Cork meetup.
Ministry of Testing Cork.
Exactly, but the good thing with these things being online as well is you can actually attend these, and obviously for Ministry of Testing, I know the Edinburgh crowd and London and Manchester Testing meetup and that as well. All these meetups similar to ourselves, a lot of the good ones have moved online over the last year as well. So the best thing to do is keep an eye on, be involved in all these communities and keep an eye on stuff. And also there's a lot of topics that are going to be relevant to people as well. And you can see when a topic like tonight is quite popular, there's going to be a large crowd involved in it as well. But feel free to reach out if there's topics that you think is benefit you or benefit your team in that as well. You don't always have to speak, but as we've said before, if there's something you want to hear about, let Dara or I know, and we'll go and find someone and we'll get them to do the talk as well. And I think he's mentioned it before as well. Anyone who always wants to put their hand up and speak, it's great. It's a very easy way of doing it online at the moment. You know, obviously, even if people feel a bit under pressure to do a live event, sometimes starting online is very, very easy to do. You know, you're speaking to your laptop. You don't know how many people are there. You don't see the faces as well. So get them done. But anyone who'd like to put their hand up, maybe put together a talk or have a go at presenting over the next few months as well, that'd be great. Niamh McGann just comment there as well. Actually, Twitter is not a good resource for asking other testers questions. Definitely, there's plenty of really good people on Twitter to follow, and it's a great way to direct message people and engage with them. I think people are a lot more responsive there as well, which is great. But yeah, the community is really important. So just tap into it, particularly when you're trying to grow or trying to expand or trying to learn new things as well. Don't be afraid to drop someone a message on LinkedIn or Twitter that you respect and ask them, can you have a virtual coffee or can you have a chat? People are helpful because everyone's got help the whole way up in their career as well. And I think someone like Conor, who's obviously good at what he does and passionate about what he does, I'm sure you probably had plenty of people helping you, Conor, over the years to get to where you are, and you probably pay it back in spades at this stage as well now, which is important.
Oh yeah, definitely two-way process. Yeah, loads of people invest in you over time. So then if people are good to you, you want to return the favor, I guess, and help people on their path. Everybody's on a different part of their journey.
Exactly. Okay, cool. So we'll leave it there. Thanks a million, everyone. Conor, thanks again. It was brilliant. I really enjoyed that. And we'll see you all next month. Okay. Take care, guys.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.